We are going right back to the year 1991. I know, deja vu, we just came from there. We talked about Laurie's show last weekend and that was in 1991. But what can I say? 1991 was a jam-packed year. So much was happening in the world and not just in true crime. Kentucky Fried Chicken officially becomes KFC. Yeah, that happened in 1991. Dr. Lecter freaked out Clarice Starling in 1991. And let's be honest, can any of us say fava beans without doing the... No, I don't think so. Back to music. I mean, I feel like music was the biggest triumph in 1991. So continuing on from Nirvana's Nevermind, we also got Pearl Jam's 10 album, Chef's Kiss. And a New York City appellate court judge actually ruled that real estate contracts are, not as binding if the house is haunted. True story, real case, and believe I will be looking that up later. But alas, with a heavy heart, our story today is not about the New York City Ghostbusters ruling. Yeah, Ghostbusters ruling. Once again, genuine, true court case. Today's case, unfortunately, is a bit more gruesome, a tad more squeamish and infuriatingly avoidable. And it happens in Texas. So buckle up. But before we get into it, welcome to the Criminal Spud, where we explore some true crime in a short and informal way. The content today will be graphic at parts, so if you're not in the headspace, go ahead, press skip, nobody is judging. However, do come back tomorrow, because tomorrow night we have a double bill of terrifying true crime stories that actually became pretty decent scary movies. And also, if you enjoy this kind of content in general, let me know by liking and subscribing. So strap in, this is the case of Charles Albright. Some of you might have heard of this guy already. I actually didn't hear about this guy before. I came across him this week when I was watching like a late night documentary on Sky. And on top of learning about a new scumbag that I'd never heard of before, I also learned a new word, enucleate. I had never heard the word enucleate before. For any of you that know what enucleation means, yeah, there's your hint about what today's case will contain. If, like me, you had never heard the word enucleate before, by the end of this story, you're going to know what it means. And for that, I am truly sorry. So let's get straight into who Charles Albright was. So this guy was born back in the 30s. And we don't really know much about his birth parents, but he was adopted as an infant by these two people, Dell and Fred. And they had no other kids, so he became like this only child that they doted on. But doted is probably like not a fair, representation. It was more mollycoddled, and it was mostly the mother, Dell. So Dell she was smothering, okay? Like it was a bit weird. It got to be a lot over the years. If anyone has seen Stephen King's It or read the book, Eddie Kaspbrak's mum, that's kind of what we're talking about. She was super freaked out about germs. She tried to terrify him into ever getting sick. She brought him to a hospital at one point and walked him around a ward to look at sick people and kind of say see, you don't want to end up like these people, so you have to be clean. And she'd make him change his clothes multiple times a day, obsessively cleaning his face, making him wash his hands. It was a lot. But then there was this massive kind of contradiction, because park all the germophobic, clean freak type stuff to the side, she also got him into a very unusual hobby for a young child. She got him into taxidermy. I didn't even think there were taxidermy courses for kids. Now, as far as I know, this seemed to be a distance learning type thing. He didn't go to a Sunday school kind of class where they all brought their own dead rabbits and stuffed them and brought them home to mount on the mantelpiece. It seemed just like a general distance learning taxidermy course that she kind of wanted to get into, and she brought him along for the ride, and it became a thing. They would go out and shoot small animals that were on the land around their house. They would find roadkill, which is just so Jeffrey Dahmer, isn't it? And they would kind of make a project out of it. Now, it was very artsy, and Charlie was naturally a very artistic child, and he grew into a very artistic adult, and he was quite good. He was quite good with crafts of any kind. However, I just find it so strange that this was a hobby that she encouraged when she was such a germaphobe. And yeah, it just, they fly in the face of each other, don't they? And maybe it was just because she was a very penny pinching kind of woman. They were a very frugal family. They weren't by any means poor, but they just really liked to mind their pennies, like I say. So maybe it was a cheaper, excursion. It was cheaper than going to the zoo every weekend. Maybe it was cheaper than getting him a dog. Why bother getting a dog? There's a perfectly good dead raccoon over there behind the shed. Stuff that and hang out with it. So Charlie did, and he got really good at it, and he would go out, he'd shoot the animal, he'd cut it, he'd scoop all the insides out, he'd take the eyes out of it, and he would sew them shut, and then he would put like these really reflective rounded black buttons where their eyes used to be, so they look like those old school creepy teddy bears. And he would kind of say to his mum, oh, can I go down to the supply store? Can I get a few quid? And I can pick up the really professional looking, marbly, glassy looking eyes, and we can like finish them off and they'll look super, super professional. And Del was like, no, like, what's wrong with your buttons? Make do with the buttons. I'm not giving you money to go and buy glass eyes for dead animals. No, thank you. And this used to really annoy Charlie, and yeah, he coveted these bloody glass eyes. It was the final piece, it was the finishing touch, so he never truly felt like any of his works were complete. And Del, she was a really strict, I would say strict, but I mean, parents can be strict and not abusive, but Del very much straddled that line. She would tell him to go to sleep or take a nap, and when he refused, or when he, was getting up and down to the bathroom or for a glass of water, like many children do, she would tie him to his bed. I mean, that's not normal. And then even as he got older and more independent and he started wanting to go and play with friends or go out on dates with girls, she would go with him. Yeah, she would accompany him. She had to chaperone everything that he did. And we know kids who have those kind of suffocating, overbearing, mommy dearest types, like they very rarely turn out to be just well-adjusted, confident adults, don't they? Like they're either going to be super low confidence, super meek, super, sheltered, or they're going to go off the rails. We all have known someone from when we were a teenager who had that overbearing parent, and then one day they just snapped and went off the rails and rebelled. And Charlie was one of those kids. So he started engaging in petty crime. He was stealing, he was getting into fights, he was burglarizing. And he got caught with a gun at one point, I believe. And then at 17, it was the first time that he had really kind of gotten caught. And they threw the book at him. They gave him a year in jail. And Del was, oh my God, Del was beside herself. For such a disciplinarian, you think she would have been like, do you know what? Serves you right. You're going to go and you're going to do your year in jail. And it'll straighten you out. No, Del was, again, mollycoddling. She was pleading with the judge. Please let me do his time for him. Let my son go free. He's such a good boy. I'll do it for him. It's all my fault. I failed him as a mother. And I just kind of think Del's such an interesting character. She's such a woman of many contradictions. On the one hand, she's this harsh disciplinarian. Like she employs these borderline and sometimes just frankly abusive discipline techniques and punishments. But then on the other hand, she's like pleading with the judge to let her do his jail time for him. And she wants to be attached to his hip, and she goes out on his dates with him as a chaperone. Like it's a very, very strange dynamic, isn't it? And he goes off anyways and he does his year in jail. And it doesn't frankly straighten him out, because it's just the beginning. And it gets worse and worse and worse over the next couple of decades. So Charlie gets out of jail at the age of 18 and he goes off to college. He wants to study biology, maybe go down the pre-med route and maybe someday become a surgeon. And he doesn't last very long in college. He engages in the social aspects of it very well, but he doesn't really do the school part, and he's still committing a lot of petty crime. He's still getting himself in a lot of trouble. So he doesn't last long. He gets kicked out of school. And I mean, it doesn't slow him down. He's still kind of like, okay, well, maybe I won't be a surgeon, but heck, I'll be a teacher anyway. I'll go and I'll teach biology. And you're probably like, wait, how does he teach biology? He got kicked out of school. Well, that doesn't stop him. He forges a degree. And not only does he forge his bachelor degree, he forges a master's as well. I mean, talk about brass balls. And he actually gets a role. He gets a job as a high school biology teacher. And I have so many questions. They let him start this job. The students love him. The faculty love him. He's actually working away and getting on great. And then down the line, he gets caught and they realize that he's forged all these transcripts and these like diplomas, and they know that he's a fraud. So he is let go, obviously, but it's a bit frightening that when you're hiring someone who's being exposed to children, you're not going to pick up the phone to the college that they say they graduated from and just get some references. It just seems very strange. It feels like they dropped the ball on that one. And yeah. Anyway, moving on. At this time, he has gotten married and he has had a child, and we don't really know a whole lot about these people. I'm sure that if you dug, there is information out there on them, but they're not very consequential to our story today. And look, by his early 30s, they were separated anyway, and he's kind of back to being a single problematic guy. And he's been let go from the school, his marriage has fallen apart, and his crimes start to escalate at this point. He's still obviously, doing the usual, the theft, the fraud, the forgery, even identity theft. So he's like cashing social security checks from other people. And I think he actually does his dad's social security checks, and he kind of assumes his identity for a while. Like it's crazy town. And during this time, even though he is committing all these crimes, he's still kind of taking on odd jobs here and there, like legitimate jobs. And it seems very fleeting. So he goes to be a hairdresser and he does that for a while, and he's really good at it because anything kind of creative or artistic, he's just got a natural flair for. He paints pictures for money, and again, very naturally gifted at it, but he just doesn't stick to it. He actually did do a portrait for one of his hairdressing clients. The guy wanted to get his wife's portrait done for her birthday as a gift, and he was like, "Where is my picture? Come on, I gave you the money, like it's taken a really long time." And he finally gets pissed off and he goes to Charlie's house and he goes in to see the painting, to see if he's actually even started this painting. And it was nearly done, and it was really, really good. He said it was super lifelike. It was absolutely breathtaking, but there was no eyes. He had just left the part where the eyes are blank on the canvas. And Charlie's like, "Yeah, I'll get to it. I keep meaning to get to it. I'll get to it." And I don't know if it's just that he never followed through on a task. He never kind of saw anything to completion. So it could very well be a part of it. However, he did also have like a weird relationship with eyes. So even back when he wanted to do his little taxidermy hobby as a kid and he didn't want to use the buttons, he wanted the realistic marble eyes that he could never have, and he always, pined after. And now this painting where he did this beautiful portrait of this woman and it was absolutely fabulous, but he just left the eyes blank, like these two holes on a canvas. He also had another weird eye related thing that he did in college. His roommate had broken up with this girl who had these gorgeous striking eyes. It was apparently a very prominent feature of hers. And then of course they broke up, so he threw out all the photos in the trash can, because back in 1991 we actually had physical photos. They were everywhere. They were in every, biscuit tin in the house. It was the best part of the 90s. But he threw out all the photos of him and his ex-girlfriend, and Charlie rifled through the trash, took out all of the photos of the ex-girlfriend and cut out all of the eyes. And at the time he did this as like a prank, like a joke, because he, kept all of the little eye cutouts and he stuck them onto pictures of your man's new girlfriend, which, I mean, it's a strange prank to pull. It's a strange joke. I don't quite get the punchline, but that's what he had played it off as. So suffice to say, Charlie has this weird thing with eyes. So yeah, bit of a tangent, I digress, but I did think that was quite relevant. So Charlie is in his 30s, like I say, he's single, his marriage has fallen apart, and he's doing all these random odd jobs, and he's still engaging in a lot of crime of various types. And he gets into trouble again. So this time he's given 6 months back in jail. Now I think he had broken into a shop and stolen the usual. So he's done a year now when he was 17, and now he's getting his second custodial sentence of 6 months again for theft. So he's building up a bit of a track record here. But when he gets out of jail this time, it seems as though he's turning it around. So he's in his 40s at this stage. Both of his parents have passed away and they've left everything to him. So he moves back to the family home and he basically becomes like a pillar of the community for a while. He knows all the neighbours. He gets on with all the neighbours. He goes out and, does his garden. He helps them work on their car if something has gone wrong. He babysits their kids. He goes to the local church for Sunday service. Like, he's properly a functioning part of the community at this stage. But surprise, surprise, this is all a farce. And around the age of 50, it all becomes apparent that Charlie is still the same awful person that he has always been. And his crimes escalate once again. But this time, instead of forgery or burglary or, petty theft or anything like that, he molests a child. Yes, he molests a child. It is a family that he knows through the church, and he's really good friends with them. He's been in their house a bunch of times and vice versa, and he's babysat their kid. They know him, they trust him, they have nothing bad to say about him. And it turns out that he was probably just grooming them as a family to get close to their child. It just seems like a massive escalation, a complete change in trajectory for Charlie. Like, who the hell just becomes a child molester at the age of 50? Was he always a child molester? Was he fiddling around when he was babysitting the neighborhood kids? Did he have these urges, as a teenager through college into his 30s? Like, where the hell did this proclivity come from? It's just so out of left field. And of course, this gets caught, he gets reported, he goes to court, and he pleads guilty to molesting a child under the age of 14. And you're probably wondering, oh my God, how long did they lock him away for this time? I bet it was a really, really short sentence and I'm going to be really annoyed. Well, you're right and you're wrong. You're going to be really annoyed, but it wasn't a really short sentence. It was no sentence whatsoever. He got no custodial sentence, 0 time for molesting a child and pleading guilty to it. And when you think about it, he, from the age of 17, has a very clear criminal track record. He's done jail time for small crimes in the past. He's been in jail more than once. So here is this repeat offender who has escalated each and every time that he's been in front of a judge. But each time he's been given less and less punishment. So at 17, he's given a year. In his 30s, he's given 6 months. And here he is molesting a child and pleading guilty to it. And he gets 0 days in jail. Just probation. Make it make sense. And he just goes about his life. So he's on probation, but at this point he meets a woman who he decides is going to be his cash cow. Her name is Dixie. She seems like a nice, unassuming woman. I have no idea how much she knew about all of this, child molestation business, because like I said, up until this point, he was a really well-liked pillar of the community, salt of the earth kind of guy. And even after he pled guilty to all of this, there were still people around town who thought this was all bogus. And he's a great guy. This is all lies. This is all based on nothing. Because of course, Charlie's telling everyone, listen, I just pled guilty to avoid the hassle. I just didn't want to put the family through any more stress, but they know the truth. I didn't really do anything here. And brass balls, because not only is he still saying after pleading guilty that he didn't actually do anything wrong, he's now met Dixie and he's got Dixie paying all of his bills, living in his house. She's basically an income stream for him. And at this time, he also decides, you know what, I need a new hobby. I'm going to apply to be a Boy Scout leader. Now, I almost just, they're taking the piss. They're winding me up. This has to be a joke. But no, he has the brass balls. Less than 5 years after all of this child molestation business, he has the actual audacity to go and apply to be a Boy Scout leader. Now, of course, they say no. They obviously have higher standards than the high school that hired him to teach their kids, which now looking back is even more troublesome that they didn't background check this guy, knowing what he went on to do. But yeah, the Boy Scouts say, no thank you. So what's he going to do to pass his time? So he's a man in his 50s. He's got a little newspaper route in the morning. That's his job. Of course, he's still keeping up with all of his petty crime and his thieving and his forgery and his fraud. But as a hobby in his evenings, he kind of has developed a very unhealthy, obsessive addiction to prostitutes in the local area. So they're in Dallas, I believe, at this point, and there's like this red light district and, this kind of area where it's very well known. It's like a hotbed of prostitution. And he goes there now, like basically every single day. So he gets up in the morning, he does his little paper route. In kind of the afternoon, he grabs a bite to eat for lunch. He engages in a little bit of petty crime, a little bit of theft, generates some more cash flow. I mean, Dixie's pretty much holding it down for the household bills and main outgoings. But he engages in some petty crime just to have a little bit of flash cash just to throw at some prostitutes by night. And they all know him. They all kind of trust him. He's like a regular, and he tends to go down, and even when he doesn't, avail of their services, shall we say, he'll still throw them cash because, he doesn't want them to be stuck. If they're having a slow night, he'll give them some money and he doesn't expect anything in return. So they kind of see him as this weird, harmless guy that they're all familiar with. And he's pushing 60 at this point. Like, he's not far off 60. So you'd think after a life of petty crime and just disgrace, he would be starting to wind it down. But no, this is where, again, he escalates in the most horrific way. Because it's around this time in 1991 that local prostitutes start showing up dead. So the first lady that is found is Mary Pratt. And she's a young girl, she's early 30s. She was a well-known local prostitute and she had some issues with drugs. But she has now been shot in the head and left on the street in a busy urban area. So it's like on the strip where all of the prostitutes kind of do their business. And it's very clear that she's been posed. So she has obviously met someone, they have brought her off, they have assaulted her, they have shot her in the head, and then they've brought her back to this really high footfall urban area, this kind of strip where all of the prostitutes do their business, and they've posed her, they've left her kind of ready to be found, partially nude, very exposed. It just seemed like maximum humiliation was their goal here. Like, they had no intention of trying to cover up her death or trying to dispose of the body. They wanted her to be found in this horribly degrading, humiliating way. And they bring her off, obviously, to the coroners, and they're starting the autopsy. And they just start with the basics. They have to note the obvious, hair colour, weight, height, eye colour. And the coroner puts her finger on the eyelid ever so gently to lift up the eyelid and note her eye colour. And she jumps back because there is nothing there. Her eyeballs have been completely removed. She's been enucleated. Yeah, enucleated. So, meaning both of her eyes have been surgically removed, and these were done with precision. Her eyelids were not at all disturbed. Someone had gone in with a really, really fine blade, a scalpel of some type, and they had gone in under the eyelid and around the eyeball and into the back of the eye and severed all of the muscles and optical nerves to remove this eye and leave the eyelid completely undisturbed, so that when her eyes were closed, it would not be evident that there was anything had been done. So when they found Mary's body on the street, she was very clearly dead. She had a gunshot wound to the head. They were not even going to try to resuscitate her, so she just went straight off to the coroner. But they didn't even notice, until the coroner lifted that eyelid, that she had been enucleated, because it had been done so flawlessly. There was no blood, there was no cuts or abrasions or scratches or any kind of nicks around the eye. It just looked like she was asleep. And this sent shivers through everybody, because who the hell did this? It wasn't just some random attack. This would have taken time, organization, skill. Who the hell did this to Mary? And this person is still out there. So we're going to need to get on that. We're going to need to find this person ASAP, because this is more than just, a John getting carried away and strangling a prostitute to death, which is still very wrong, let me be clear. But this seems to be something a lot more pre-planned, very sinister, very gruesome. This was done by some absolute psychopath. There was no two ways about it. So the coppers that were kind of familiar with that strip and kind of knew a lot of the prostitutes from bringing them in over the years, they got out there and they started talking to the girls and seeing if they had seen anything, heard anything. Was there anyone that stands out? Have you come across anyone who was a little bit off? They're looking for any kind of lead that they can get. But as you can imagine, it is a needle dick in a haystack, because these women come across weirdos day in and day out. And then when it comes to their regulars that they know are kind of weird but probably not murderers, they're not just going to hand over their client list to the cops. Like, come on now. But then one working girl, Veronica, she comes up to a police officer and she's like really, really frantic. She's covered in mud. She's clearly just been attacked and she is beside herself. And she's telling this cop, you know, I've been drugged. I was carried out into the middle of nowhere. You know, I got away barely. This guy, he was going to kill me. And she's telling him this horror story. And she managed to, you know, kind of tussle with him and get away, and she made a run for it, and she got as far as the roadside and she flagged down this driver, and this driver was, funnily enough, another one of her Johns, and he recognized her and he was like, oh my god, get in, and he saved her. And she's telling the cop this, and the cop was like, okay, we need to jot this down as intel, you know, this could maybe potentially help us find the guy who attacked Mary Pratt. But, you know, we just don't have enough to go on. There's nothing there to suggest it's the same guy who killed Mary. And at this point I was watching it and I was feeling really disappointed that he's being told this by a girl, a first-hand account. She's just been attacked. She barely made it out with her life in her own words, and she is traumatized, but they're not really looking into this guy because they're not sure. You know, there's not enough to go on to suggest this is the guy that they're looking for in relation to the Mary Pratt murder. And I just felt a little bit disappointed in that because they were kind of saying, oh, well, this girl, she's not very credible. And I'm like, why? She's literally covered in mud. You can tell that she has been in some kind of an altercation and she's distraught and she's telling you someone that she knows rescued her and picked her up. So there's a witness, but you're not going to really investigate this at this point because it's not going to potentially lead you to Mary Pratt's murderer. It's not enough that, you know, there's a violent attacker out there. It didn't sit right with me. I know it's a small thing to call out, but they didn't really take the report of this attack on its own merit, you know, as a standalone basis. Prostitutes just get attacked all the time, you know, it's kind of commonplace. And it's sad because we know if this girl that came running up to him that night had been, you know, a young college student or, you know, a lawyer or a doctor or basically anyone who's not a prostitute or a drug user, they probably would have gotten out there and combed the area and taken this seriously and investigated it regardless of whether or not it had any connection to a recent murder. So yeah, that's just my little rant over with. And it's not long before a second body shows up, because a couple of months later, we get nearly an identical find. A second lady, late 20s, her name is Susan Peterson, and she's found on the exact same strip that Mary was found on. And she has 3 gunshot wounds to her head. She is also posed very deliberately, again, half naked. And of course, they're going to check this time. They're going to lift that eyelid. And when they do, they can see immediately that her eyes have been surgically removed. So they can very confidently link these 2 murders. This is the same killer. It is almost a mirror image. And they potentially now have a serial killer on their hands, which is bad news. So they get back out there, they are canvassing that area, they are talking to anybody who will give them information, and then boom, within a couple of weeks we get a third woman. We get Shirley Williams. She is mid-30s, and this one is a little bit different. It's very clearly the same killer, make no mistake about that, but the Shirley Williams body is found in much worse condition. Not only is she found having been sexually assaulted with gunshot wounds to the head, she is also beaten to a bloody pulp. She's had her nose broken. She's been struck in the face with a blunt object. She has got a piece of blade stuck in her cheek. Her eyes, yes, of course, her eyes have been removed, but they haven't been removed with the same kind of care and precision. It's a little bit of a frantic panic job in this case, and it's very clear that someone has done a hack job on her eye sockets. She also has a little piece of X-Acto knife blade still left in one of her eye sockets. So by the looks of it, the level of violence and the level of kind of disorganization and panic in this murder, it kind of gives the impression that Shirley has really, really fought hard. She really fought for her life and she was not going to go down easily. And this clearly angered our assailant, because not only did he do a hack job on her eyes, because he must have been spooked, he must have been shook after she fought back so hard. The audacity of her to fight for her life. He punished her. Even after he took her life, he took her eyes. He continued to punish her, because he didn't dump her in that same spot that he dumped the other women. This time he dumped her outside an elementary school. Yes, an elementary school where young children with their parents were going to show up the next morning and find this semi-naked woman who's been sexually assaulted, had her eyes ripped from her head, beaten to a bloody pulp. They were going to find this. So it's beyond maximum humiliation. It's punishment. It's degradation. It's dehumanizing her. And it's obviously thrown this killer into a tailspin, because he's devolving now. He's devolving very quickly. And in Shirley's case, when they examine her body, they're able to recover some male hairs. So at least they have some actual physical evidence now to link to a perpetrator. So they just need to get some suspects in front of them to start narrowing it down. And then one of the other local prostitutes, Brenda, she gets into a man's car. Now, she's never really met this man before. He's not one of her regulars. She's not familiar with him. And Brenda is very experienced. She's been doing this for a while, so she has her own kind of routine. And she has a motel around the corner that when she's going off with some guy that she doesn't know or she's not met with before and she doesn't kind of have that relationship with, she will only go to this same motel because, you know, it's a little bit more of a safety net for her. And when she gets in the car and she tells this guy, we're going to go around the corner and we're going to this motel, he kind of says, well, no, we're going to go back to my house. I'm going to take you somewhere else. And Brenda kind of says, no, listen, this is my policy. We don't know each other. So this is the only place that we're going to go. It's that or it's nothing. And he's really just digging his heels in. He's telling her he's got somewhere better. He's going to take her to his place. It's more private. And she says, let me out of the car. It's a no from me. Let me out. Pull over. I will get out here. And he becomes incensed. He gets very, very aggravated. His rage just goes off the charts. And he starts telling her, I hate you prostitutes. I hate you hookers. I want to kill you all. And Brenda has her pepper spray in hand, ready to go. And she blasts him in his face and blinds him. And she lets herself out of the car and she goes straight to the police and she reports what has just happened. And when they get this report from Brenda, they kind of say, listen, we need to check this out. We have to absolutely follow this up. Brenda's got a clear description of this guy. She's got a description of the car. They've got something to follow up on. And they go back then at this point to Veronica. So do you remember Veronica? She was attacked by this guy. She escaped and she was rescued by one of her regulars. And she had reported this to one of the cops on the beat. And this was after the first killing. And she said, listen, this guy was going to kill me and I escaped and he's crazy. And one of my regulars, he helped me, he rescued me and he drove me back. And it was never really looked at. Well, now they kind of say, okay, let's go back to Veronica and let's maybe get her account of that night again. And long and behold, Veronica gives the exact same account. Nothing has changed from the first time that she told this story. And they get the name of this regular who had saved her. And they say, we're going to check him out first. So they check him out. He's obviously not our guy. But his last known address is a house that's registered to a Charles Albright. So Charles Albright, our horrible, horrible little bastard, not only has he inherited his family home and he lives there with Dixie, who pays all his bills, he also has a couple of other properties around the area and he rents them out. So this guy, which I just think that's too much of a coincidence. I need to get more context. I need to understand how the guy that rescued Veronica was actually living in a house owned by the guy who attacked Veronica. Like, were they friends? Why was he so nearby? I have so many questions, but listen, we're going to park that for a second. So basically, the guy that rescued Veronica, when they followed him up, it led them to Charles Albright. So they said, Okay, well, let's have a look at his record. Let's pull his name up, do a quick search in the system and see if there's anything there that is of interest. And lo and behold, up comes this very detailed record. He's got multiple things on his record. And he has a mugshot. So they're like, okay, we'll print off this mugshot and we'll bring it to Brenda and we'll bring it to Veronica and we'll see if either of them recognize this mugshot. So they do. They present Veronica and Brenda with this mugshot of Charles Albright, and straight away they're like, that is him. So they have their guy and they go to his actual house where he lives with Dixie, and they bust through the door in like this early morning rage. They get them up out of bed. Dixie is like, what on earth? What is going on? And they haul his ass in for questioning. And then they search his house. They go through everything. They cut open his vacuum bag, for God's sake. And they manage to comb through his car as well. And they do recover some hair fibres that links him directly to Shirley. So do you remember Shirley? She was our last victim. And she was the one who fought back, and he didn't like that. So it got very vicious. It got very brutal and very disorganized. And he left a hair fibre there. So they were able to trace that to him. They were able then to find hairs of Shirley's in his house and in his car that traced back to her. So they had him. He was goosed, but he just sat there with this completely unbothered, totally chill, relaxed face, like he was just passing the time waiting in line at the DMV. So he was charged with all 3 murders, and he was never going to plead guilty, but it went to trial. And he was only found guilty for Shirley's murder. And he was sentenced to life without parole, which, I mean, look, he never got out. He actually died in prison in 2020. So that's something. But it's horrible to think that those 2 other girls, Mary and Susan, never got the justice that they deserved. And also, there was kind of rumours. People have said that he's made some very ominous remarks when he was in prison. He kind of did the OJ thing where, because he never confessed, but he kind of said, if I had been a serial killer, which I'm not, but if I had been, I would have been a really great one because I'm so good at everything that I try. And I just think it's so sick. And he did apparently allude to there being more women out there that he has taken the lives of, but I actually don't believe that. As much as a psychopath as he is, I don't, because number one, he's a pathological liar. But if we look at the way that he killed these women, the way he posed them, he wanted them to be found. It was very exhibitionist. He wanted to humiliate them. He wanted to degrade them and dehumanize them. So I would find it very hard to believe that he took someone's life and hid them away, never to be found. So grain of salt there, I think. But this case, it's horrific, it's tragic, and it's just, like I said in the beginning, I found it infuriatingly avoidable, because when we look at Chris Albright's background, he was a career criminal, and the fact that before any of these murders happened, long before any of these murders happened, he pled guilty to child molestation. And it wasn't his first offence. He had multiple priors, but they let him walk. They just gave him probation and he was back out into the world. And I feel like it just emboldened him. Like they had ample opportunity to take this monster off the street. And it just goes to show that there's certain crimes, like whatever about a burglary as a teenager, you're not going to hold someone's crimes when they're a kid against them forever. But there are certain crimes, and child molestation, I'm sorry, is right up there at the top of the list. That should be a massive fucking red flag. And you should see that this is not just an accident. It's not a whoopsie. It's not a, oh, I was provoked, I snapped, I had a moment of madness. This is a sickness. This is someone who's got darkness in them. This is someone who is capable of doing very bad things. So yeah, I can't square that in my mind. I can't understand on what planet that makes sense. And again, like I say, who knows? If he had have potentially been given a hefty sentence, he had have been taken off the street, who knows what would have happened? Who knows if these acts would have transpired? And yeah, I suppose we'll never know. It's a what if. But guys, that was it. That was the case of Charles Albright, the enucleator. I am definitely going downstairs now to make a hot chocolate and watch a funny movie, probably something Will Ferrell esque because I need a giggle after talking about that. But like I said, I'll be back on here tomorrow night because this weekend we are going to do a double bill and we are going to talk about 2 really creepy true crime cases that actually were made into horror movies. So you probably know them already, but I'm still going to talk about them because they scare the bejesus out of me. But that's it for tonight, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a lovely evening and sweet dreams.